Okay. So good afternoon and welcome all. Again, as most of you know, my name is Marissa Bluestein. I'm with the Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School. Today we have kind of a double focus for our monthly webinar meeting for those who are doing work in conviction integrity from prosecutors' offices and innocence organization. We've been focusing this year on intake and screening. Today we're going to start focusing on data. One of the most asked questions we get at the center is from folks about data. What kind of data should we be collecting? How should we be using it? How can we analyze it? And that goes for whether you're within an innocence organization or a conviction integrity unit. So we are partnering, I'm very proud to say, with two experts, Andrew Taylor and Bobby Constantino, on this topic to be able to help us with a project that we are going to be doing over the summer to be able to try to put together guidelines for innocence organizations and CIUs on what type of data to collect, how to collect it, how to analyze it, and how it can be used to help move your organization forward in a more efficient way, in a way that really helps you learn from past error to try to prevent future error from happening. So we are both going to be talking with you about data that you can be collecting now and how to be doing that, as well as breaking into smaller groups so we can hear from you guys about what it is that you're doing, how are you collecting data, what do you want to be doing, what are the barriers to be able to being able to do more data or collection and analysis, and how can we as a center and we as a project kind of help you move forward with all of that. So we really essentially want you to be able to get where you want to be faster by using better data collection and data analysis, and to improve your functioning. Now, we understand that those of you who are interested in this take on, it's going to be a long time before you are able to kind of get where you want to be. But we're here to kind of help you along that way and give you some tools along the process to be able to help with that. Obviously, this is a meeting that involves both conviction integrity unit personnel and innocence organizations. So we'll be talking with folks from both of those groups. A lot of the work that's being done right now, however, is being done in prosecutor's office, particularly Mr. Constantino and Mr. Taylor both work directly with prosecutors' offices to help them improve their data collection overall. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from innocence organizations. What data would be helpful for you to be able to get from conviction integrity units? What should be publicly available? What might be something that you should be able to get with the request for a cooperating CIU, and how can we kind of help improve that data collection and data sharing? So I'm going to hand over to Bobby, and who will hand over to Andrew in just a moment. Then we'll have an opportunity to have folks meet in breakout rooms. And with no offense to anybody on this call in any ways, we're breaking those into what we call the crawling group, the walking group, and the running group. So crawling being folks who are interested in collecting data but haven't really started, or maybe you collected but it's on a piece of paper somewhere in your office, or you kind of thinking about doing an Excel spreadsheet. The walking group being for those who are keeping some kind of data now, whether it be an Excel spreadsheet or some other basic data collection. And then the running folks are the CIUs who are already integrated with the data in your office, or innocence organizations that have a very robust data collection. Kind of looking at you folks from CPCS on that one, and being able to really kind of think about how you can move your data collection, your data analysis to the next level. And then we'll be coming back and we'll talk more about this project that we have over the summer. But briefly, you've probably already seen the email that we sent out about it. Over the summer, we'll be having folks meet in small discussion groups in probably 2 or maybe 3 sessions over the summer, and from that, gathering that information back and producing guidelines on data practices, data collection and analysis. And so we hope to be able to give back to you a resource, much like we did last year with the rules for collaboration and engagement. So I think I've probably talked too long. I'm going to hand off to Bobby Constantino and ask him to take it away.
Thanks so much, Marissa. And thank you so much to the Quattrone Center for creating this space to have this important conversation. If everyone could just make sure that their mics are muted from the jump, that would be great. All right, so I'm going to do a quick overview here of what Andrew and I are going to cover in our slides. We're going to give you some examples of data challenges that offices have in common recognizing if you look at this Venn diagram here, that many of the DAO CIUs that are here and the innocence orgs are at different stages in their data collection journey. And we want to try and hit on some themes that we think will apply to everyone. And then in the breakout sessions, try and meet offices where you are so that we can tailor solutions and tailor ideas and recommendations directly to you. And then the second part, after identifying some of these challenges, is Andrew is going to give a preview of some of the innovations that have occurred in technology and in data collection and analysis to give offices some ideas quickly, and then we'll jump into the groups to talk about them more, to show you how you might use data to improve your practice to identify cases faster and proactively. And then as we jump through these slides, just please keep in mind these three sort of basic categories. Marissa mentioned that we are sort of using like a crawl, walk, run continuum. I would say that crawling is like help. We're buried in paper documents and we have files out the door and we need to figure out how to use them effectively and put them into electronic data. The middle group would be something like, we have an Excel spreadsheet and we're working towards making it better. We have a survey that we want to put online and generate data automatically, and we need some help doing that. And then the third would be if you're in an office that has very good data collection practices or that receives data from a partner agency automatically, and you'd like to improve your game on how you use that data effectively. All right, so the first example that I'm going to use is a case that happened in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, in Boston. Did folks that are on this call have a chance to watch this during COVID? Not sure if folks did, but it was something that came out while we were all doing work from home, and it was somewhat surreal working in this office as the data person when this documentary came out. And just briefly, the case is about a homicide of a Boston police detective in 1993. A man named Sean Ellis was arrested and convicted for that homicide. And what later came out was that the detective that was deceased and a number of his partners, including those that investigated the case, had been involved in a very significant criminal enterprise, and none of that had been disclosed to the original defense team. And so activists, community members, defense attorneys, and others have been trying to bring this to the attention of the DA's office for a long time. And then in 2021, DA Rachel Rollins was in office. She had created an integrity review bureau, and the office agreed to consent to his release, and he was released from prison. And so I bring up that example of that case because in addition to the Ellis case, the office, the Integrity Review Bureau, which is what that office called its version of a conviction integrity unit, was compiling a Brady list. And among the people on that list were, of course, the three detectives who investigated the Ellis case, who were found to have been involved in some significant criminal activity. And the first and obvious request that many of you may have made to your data teams is, can we create a list of all of the cases quickly that include the people that are on our Brady list, or the people that we know that have been involved in misconduct, or the people that we know who have perjured themselves on the stand, and so on and so forth. And so this is a good example from Suffolk County because it reveals some of the challenges that are involved here. So homicide detectives don't usually start in homicide. They often work their way through different units and different assignments before they become homicide detectives. And if you want to see all of their cases, they might be in cases that aren't preserved as long as homicide files, which are generally kept longer than other cases or even forever. And so if we wanted to compile a list of those three detectives, many of the cases that they handled predated when the office started capturing electronic data, which was in the 2000s. So remember that this case happened in the 90s. If there were cases that they handled that we wanted on the list, they would predate this electronic data gathering. The homicide files would probably have been retained, but all of these other files, if they were less serious cases, probably weren't. And then in the later cases, after the office started capturing this data, what we found when we tried to make lists was that many of the names of the officers who had been present on a case, worked on a case, provided transport, done booking, done supplemental reports, and investigated and followed up, their names weren't listed in the database, just the name of the reporting officer was. And the reason why was because in Suffolk County, like in many offices, we have human beings manually taking paper case files, looking at them, and then entering each data point into the computer database electronically. And what happens is you have to triage the information that you take because of time constraints. Many admins in these offices, they have a number of other responsibilities, including taking walk-ins, answering the phone, dealing with people who have suffered harm, trying to navigate all of that on top of entering all of this data. And so what we realized is that there were paper files, boxes upon boxes upon boxes of them that were in storage. In Massachusetts, you're only required to keep 5 years of district court cases, and then the year that's +5 each year gets thrown into the fire and incinerated. So what we were trying to do is find a way to scan that data into the database so that we could complete those queries and other queries that were important. But unfortunately, we didn't find a lot of assistance in that realm at the time. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about later when it comes to like using optical character recognition to scan files into a computer database. But long story short is that unless the police agency shared that list with the IRB in Suffolk, staff would have to conduct a manual review of those paper files to generate a list, and that takes a very long time. The second example, adding to how surreal this was, because remember, I was working in this office at the time during COVID, another Netflix documentary in 2020 came out about another scandal that happened in Massachusetts. It was about 2 drug lab chemists who were falsifying drug certs. And as I was watching this documentary on Netflix at the time, it was during COVID, and the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts had issued a ruling that allowed people to be released under certain circumstances. And one of the problems that we were having when we were trying to query the data to see who was eligible is that the data wasn't live. It was in static form. And so we didn't know when people who had been held pretrial or when they had been sentenced to jail or prison, if they were still in custody. And so it created immense problems in figuring out who was still in custody and who was eligible. And during COVID, as I'm watching this documentary, defense attorneys are lamenting. And remember, this documentary is from something that happened in the 2010s, right? So here we are a decade later during COVID, and defense attorneys are lamenting that they can't find who was still in jail or prison on drug charges because the data wasn't accurate and it wasn't live or updated. And so during that process, we were trying to, for example, create a list of warrants on cases that involved decline to prosecute charges only, so we could proactively vacate those warrants so people wouldn't be taken into custody and brought into facilities with COVID outbreaks for social distancing purposes. And the bottom line, again, as with the other request that we were trying to come up with, is that we couldn't do it. And this was because of flaws in the data. And so it felt like Groundhog Day, and I'm sure it feels like that in many of the offices where you all work, where you really need this data urgently to make progress on the urgent and important work that you're doing. And so frequently you run into roadblocks and you can't. The reason why all of that is so important is because you have these windows that open. And this is just a very quick sampling of some of the conviction integrity work that's happening in a few offices. I chose these offices because they had easily available graphics that I could use in a pinch, but there are many, many, many others, of course, that are doing this important work. And when these windows open, you don't know how long they're going to stay open. So these are the numbers that these offices have published under the administrations that are doing that work. And the work that DA Rollins was doing in Suffolk lasted about 2.5, 3 years when she went on to become the US attorney. The work in Cook County, Illinois, started in 2016 when Kim Foxx was elected, and she has announced that she'll be stepping down in 2024. Does that window close, or does another administration who is amenable to looking into these types of cases and coming up with as many vacated convictions and overturning as many wrongful convictions and remedying as much injustice as possible, will an administration amenable to doing that come into office, or will they not? The question is, we don't really know how long these windows stay open. And so therefore, when the windows do open, it's critical that all of the resources, personnel, and tech are in place with the data ready to get going, to the extent that that's possible, so that rather than waiting in a reactive position, which is for cases to come in, which is often the position that CIUs and IOs find themselves in, it's additionally possible that while those referrals begin coming in and they keep streaming in, you can also do the proactive work of identifying cases and trends and actors in the system so that you can begin to make lists of cases that you know need further scrutiny. So there are a lot of gaps that exist in this space. We're aware of that. When we break out into the rooms, we'll talk about those some more, but there's a ton of innovation happening. There are a number of organizations who are jumping in to do this work around the country that we'll discuss in much more detail in the coming summits that we have. But it's important to know now that like all is not lost. There's definitely hope on the horizon, and we want to help each office where they're at work through that. And the reason why is because, as you can see here, this is simply a heat map of the National Registry of Exonerations. And you can see that there are still so many untapped jurisdictions where tons of misconduct needs to be remedied. And in order to get a lot of those states way more towards the red scale, which is that they are frequently, having exonerations occur and remedying those past injustices, we're going to be needing to use a lot more data and technology to identify these quickly and be ready when the moment arises. So those are some of the challenges briefly that we see in that world. It's by no means exhaustive. I know that there are many others that each of you individually and collectively are facing, and I look forward to jumping into the groups to do that. And now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Andrew to talk about some of these innovations and to show you real world examples of how this data and tech can help you move through this work faster and with the sense of urgency that's commensurate with the critical nature of the work that you all do. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much. Just a second here to switch screens. Okay, everybody can see that all right? Give me the sign.
It's coming on.
Well, for the sake of preamble here, if what we were just looking at are some very common examples of what might happen when there is no data, what I'm going to walk you through here now is two examples before I give it back to Bobby for a third of what we can do in situations where we have very little access to data that I hope will be exciting. And I really want to focus on these in particular because I believe that probably most people on this call are on board that having more data would be great, and that often the problem we encounter is that the capacity to make that happen is very challenging to find. It's very difficult to get staff who can do the data entry required, let alone the sort of quality assurance that's required to make sure that data is actually usable. I myself have had the pleasure of working with a lot of prosecutors' offices, and they are often quite frustrated when we might crack open the database for the first time in the history of the office, and we look back 10 years and see that things are such a mess that it's very difficult to say anything of value, let alone of value for something that's sensitive. But what
Andrew,
we'll look
sorry,
at,
your visual is not coming through yet.
No, it shouldn't. It's blank for the time being.
Okay.
Don't you worry. I'm building suspense, my monotone voice. But in that spirit, let's look at this first example here, which is specifically trying to answer this question. It comes from the University of California's Berkeley's Possibility Lab in partnership with a nonprofit called For the People, working in Yolo County, California. Sets out to answer a question relevant to a lot of our work here, which is, can we make it easier for prosecutors to resentence people in prison? And to phrase this in the form of a very precise problem they are trying to solve, for some context here, in 2019, nonprofit For the People helped lead the passage of the first prosecutor-initiated resentencing act in California. That means there's the power for prosecutors to initiate resentencing without waiting for a petition. If we follow some of the information associated with the press release from this project, you can see that George Gascon in LA directed his staff to review sentences for everybody in prison serving more than 15 years. We also know that this takes about an average of 8 hours per case to review all of the relevant documentation for resentencing here. If we break this down a little bit, According to the same press release, just from LA, that would have been 9,364 people who are eligible for this kind of review. That would take 8 hours per case, should be 74,912 hours of work, 3,121 days, or about 8.5 years if somebody was working on this 24 hours a day, which of course is ridiculous. So if you imagined 3 staff working full time on nothing but this, it would take approximately 12 years to have reviewed all the cases that were eligible. Not a very realistic approach, particularly as by the time they got through that, there would then be lots of people who spent a lot of time in prison who would need to be reviewed again. Where this project with the Possibility Lab comes in is that they developed a tool using a variety of different techniques in data science to help sort the documentation in a way where some key pieces of information would be highlighted or extracted to help expedite the review by the prosecutors doing the review. Now, what I think is exciting about this is not only does it not require a case management system at all, but it ultimately doesn't make the decision for the staff. This isn't about automating who gets flagged for review or not. It's about improving the way that the prosecutors doing the review can mess through the paperwork. And the result of this is that it took the average time, and this is in Yolo County, not in LA necessarily, but regardless, took the average time from 8 hours for review down to 1 hour for review. And unless you think this is, overvaluing efficiency in some way, the result of this is that it goes from an estimated 12.5 years with 3 full-time staff down to an estimated 1.5 years. Much more realistic approach, trying to get to the number of people that need to be reviewed, and something that could realistically be done on an ongoing basis then. I give one more example here. This is a joint project from Stanford and the University of Oregon. It's not with one particular office, but it's about looking at all parole hearing transcripts in California for a finite period of time. And again, what I think is really exciting about this is the only data source that was used here were parole hearing transcripts. Again, no database required, done with a team of 3 people and 2 analysts, both of whom were PhD students at the time. Again, phrase this in the form of a more specific problem. Let's say that there's a hypothetical office. They really want to know what factors are contributing to whether or not somebody is granted parole. Maybe they were just, maybe they just attended a training on implicit bias by a nonprofit. Let's call them the Vera Institute of Justice or something like that, who might do these kinds of trainings. They don't necessarily, now they're very interested in knowing these factors, but they don't really have any data available. In fact, the only data they could potentially get are these parole hearing transcripts, which are very long, take a long time to request and even longer to review. We were to do sort of a conventional approach in social science, might take a subset of these transcripts, try to code them in some way, make inferences from part of that. That may or may not produce meaningful results, really depends on how many people we have available to read them and do data entry, depending on how we sample them, might not be particularly useful. It's certainly not going to become a part of anybody's day-to-day operations. It's going to be a large-scale one-off project. What the researchers on this project instead did, using more techniques you would be more commonly seen in data science, in this particular case, something called natural language processing, but also made use of what Bobby was referencing, which is a technique called optical character recognition. In short, they were able to extract data from all the transcripts and derive what was associated with the parole outcome in an automated way, using code that's able to read human English and convert that into data that can be analyzed. And because this is fully automated, they were able to develop as well a prototype of a tool that feasibly could be used as a part of day-to-day operations. And just give you a very brief idea of what this looks like. Here's a quick summary of some of the key results that they've shown. I'm not going to really get into the details here because I'm sure we're all not here to read regression coefficients. But certainly one thing that is of note is that you might see far to the right of the dotted line here indicates that one of these factors was associated with being more likely to be granted a parole outcome, net of controlling for all these other factors. Now we can see having a retained attorney meant that somebody was more than twice as likely to be granted parole, even after controlling for many other factors listed here. In fact, many more that are not listed here. And if this is something you're interested in more detail, I'm certainly happy to share the details of the study afterwards. But what I really would like us to focus on, what I think will be more relevant to the topic today, is the prototype of the tool that was developed. Because you can see here, it's a series of drop-down menus which pertain to different factors associated with somebody at a parole hearing. And what it's returning is a predicted outcome of them being granted parole. And what's particularly interesting here is you could change these things very quickly, say the race from white to black, and get a sense of how the difference in predicted probability would change. And with that, perhaps make some decisions in day-to-day operations for what to do in this sort of situation. And I would hope, if you can see where I'm going here, is perhaps you could imagine something comparable in conviction integrity, where if we were to say have all of our canonical risk factors represented here, say if we were able to extract them automatically from scanned paper documents, we might get some sense of the predicted probability of a wrongful conviction or potential eligibility for resentencing, maybe find a way to more efficiently target some cases that could be overlooked. And on that note, I guess I'll give it back to Bobby here, talk about one more tool that I believe you were working on previously.
Sure, you can just go through it rather than resharing if you want.
Sure.
And so there's generally this idea, I think, that exists between DAOs and CIUs, which is kind of like the DAO is over there and we're over here doing our work. And one of the things that I think is important to emphasize here is how important the administrative data is the office for CIU purposes in ways that Andrew just enlarged upon a little bit. But also in other ways. And so this is just an example of something that was a prototype for a dashboard that was being done. This also actually was piloted in Yolo, California. CZI was working on this for a while when they were doing some funding and some exploration in this space. A data scientist named Rob Owen was the one who was putting this together. And essentially what this allowed offices to do, and remember that these were all ADAs in a courthouse handling the same caseload, is that it showed offices how they could improve the practice of their ADAs, because some of them, like Mike, in the bottom left quadrant, the x-axis here is length of incarceration in terms of years, and so that's across the horizontal bottom line, and then the y-axis along the leftmost vertical line is future felony recidivism. And so what this showed offices was who were the outliers, who was asking for the longest jail sentences most frequently, and then who had those same sentences resulting in high recidivism rates in the future in terms of felony recidivism was the metric that they were using. And you can see that in the top right quadrant there's an ADA, Oswald, who's way up there in terms of sentence length and future recidivism. And you have Mike down in this bottom left quadrant who's clearly doing something very, very different. And so, Andrew, if you go to the next slide, the idea here is to figure out, as an executive team, what's going on? What is Oswald doing differently from Mike? And in terms of both harm from incarceration and in terms of saved resources and many, many other things, right, including wrongful convictions and so forth, we need to get all of our staff moving to where Mike is. Now, this is important for an executive team in an office, but I want CIU staff here to think about and dream about. Imagine if you had a similar ability in your offices, respectively, to see who were the outliers that were relying on cross-racial identifications the most in sexual assault cases, right, where we know there's a huge likelihood of a wrongful conviction occurring there, or in any other way that you can think of creatively, like just thinking about what Andrew was talking about, where you could visualize on this graphic cases that you might have missed, or actors that there might be serious signs that there's misconduct or other concerning conduct happening. And a dashboard like this would be able to help you identify them quickly and easily. And so I think that what this is just trying to underscore is that it's not just the CIU data we have here in our own unit that's important to our work. It's also that our DAO or our Innocence Org or the others that are working with the DA's office and their partners start thinking about ways that they can get all of this data into a database electronically and access it so that they can begin to keep tabs on what's going on in the past and in real time, and begin to identify people and actors and cases and caseloads where problems are more likely to be arising. And what's the next slide, Andrew? I think it's just the bibliography and the resources. And so with that said, I think now I'm going to turn it back over to Marissa, and we're going to jump into our groups. And for anyone interested, we can, of course, share the deck with those resources and so forth.
Yes, and we did put a PDF of the deck into the chat for folks, so you have access, especially to that resource page on the back end that we're saying. So now, what are we doing now? So now the goal is we're going to have folks choose the breakout group that fits your situation best. As I said, we have crawling, walking, running. So if you are in an office that is primarily on paper, you're not collecting much data, or you don't have access to much data, you'd be in kind of the beginner group, and Kia Hayes, where she is on here, is going to be leading that discussion. The walking group, that's maybe you've got an Excel sheet that you're taking data with. If you're in an innocence organization, maybe you've got some historical data that you have access to, and you're trying to look for bad actors or other jurisdictional issues or racial issues to identify cases you want to look at. You'll be in the walking group with me and with Andrew. And if you're in an office that has a robust data collection, if you're in a CIU and you have access to the office-wide database where you're able to get the information that Bobby was talking about, for example, or if you're in an innocence organization attached to a public defender's office, or you have other access to good data, you'll go into the running. The point of this group is to have you learn from each other and share together what kind of obstacles you're having right now in terms of collecting data. What do you find that's helpful for you? And how can we help come up with solutions to be able to even move you forward along those? I'm just going to pause and see if Bobby or Andrew has anything to add to those. To what I just said?
No, that's great.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and open those rooms, so you can choose the room that you feel fits both best. I'm going to remind Andrew and Bobby and Kia to record locally while you're in your breakout room, so that we can make sure we have the record.
As my conviction integrity unit actually began accepting applications May 1st of this year. So we've been in existence maybe 6 weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We are excited to have the unit and to get it up and running, but really we've not been collecting any data yet because we are so new. So I thought the crawling group was appropriate for my office.
Great. And so you said you currently don't use anything to track case information. You're still getting all that in place. And figuring out what the
Absolutely.
needs are, yeah.
We are using Excel currently, to sort of create something as we're getting some of these new applications in.
Got it. Next I have Jen Kamarowski, is that correct?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you. So my name is Jennifer Kamarowski, and I'm with the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project. And I chose this group because I wasn't sure if we're crawling or walking. So actually my legal director is in the walking group. So we got it all covered. But we've been in existence for over 20 years. So we have all of this, mostly paper files that we would love to be able to go back and do some work in terms of coding, that sort of thing. But we're also working on a project to try to identify, similar to what the parole idea was, using NLP and that sort of thing. We're working with a company to try to develop a better system or a supplement to our screening and intake process to help speed things along and making determinations about whether we should reject the case at that point or whether there's going to be some additional steps taken. So, we just recently hired a part-time data analyst. So we have a lot of projects that we're like getting off the ground, but in terms of actually collecting data, we have so much that we're gonna have to go back and do later on, and we're at the beginning stage of figuring out what data do we need to be collecting, do we want to be collecting from this point forward, and trying to adapt our questionnaire and that sort of thing to those factors.
Yeah, thank you. And Jen, do you currently use anything like Excel or anything like that?
For certain things, yes. There's certain information that's tracked through our online case management system, Clio. unfortunately, it's not always, so we can pull some statistics and pull some information and get some case numbers and very basic things like that. But you know, part of the problem is over time, the Clio different statuses haven't been used consistently. There's missing information, you know, the usual problems with data. So I would say we do have just a very basic sort of data collection. And we can pull reports from Clio, but it's really not up to snuff with what we actually need and are aspiring to.
Yeah, thank you. Next I have Patrick Tran.
Yeah, everybody, I'm the bureau chief of the new conviction integrity unit for the state of Illinois Attorney General's office. We're still at our infancy stage, building out the units and our policies and processes. Working on a few other things. So chose crawling because we don't have a database in place yet. We're currently shopping around software, determining exactly what kind of data we want to capture and what we want to do with it. So that's why we're here, to just kind of see if other people are in the same boat, what other people are experiencing. So thanks.
Thanks for joining. Next I have Kathy Hahn.
Hi, so I am interested in this topic. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania and am retired from regulatory compliance in the banking area. Started my career in law enforcement as well as data analysis. So joining these groups to see, particularly this group, how these units get started. I have an interest in seeing, to some degree, whether my local county, Chester County, can start their process with conviction integrity units. So thank you.
So you're not currently a practitioner?
No, no.
Okay. And so you said you have a background in law enforcement?
Have background in corrections as well as data analyst with Department of Justice, and kind of left that a while ago and moved into regulatory compliance, but am interested in going back to, quite frankly, my first love, which is justice reform.
Okay, thank you. And Bethany?
Hi, Bethany from the Kentucky Innocence Project. I'm in this group because I'm not exactly sure if we even have a system for data collection. We work a lot under grants, so I know data is collected for those purposes. But as far as like actually getting data from our cases, for example, like common police officer names that keep popping up, I don't think we have anything like that set up. So this is a basic informational thing, so I can bring information to my director and see if we can implement some of this.
Great, well, thank you for joining. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, my name's Marissa Felica. I am an ASA in our conviction integrity unit in Orlando, Florida. I came to this particular meeting. We manage a lot of our data electronically. We have access to our whole case management system digitally, but we are definitely not tracking and collecting, I think, in the ways that are most effective. And we've been doing a lot of sort of reconsideration and rebuilding lately. So I'd just like to see how you would advise sort of how to start this process and see if we have any changes we'd like to make.
Thank you. Hi, Lorna, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Kia?
Good to see you.
I am with the Conviction Integrity Unit for Shelby County, Tennessee. We call ourselves Justice Review Unit. And we started November, we opened December 1st. And so we're babies at this. And so I came to the crawlers, and my cohort, Rob Gowan, is over in the walking group.
Next I have Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen Ratliff. I am with the New Jersey Conviction Review Unit in the Attorney General's office. And currently, we started in spring of 2019, and we use an Excel spreadsheet. And in addition, we also have a case management tracking system. And a lot of we scan everything that comes in. We have our conviction review shared drives so that everyone in the unit can get to everything. Files that are large, like prosecutors' files that we get as part of our cases, we don't put those in the case management system. We put those on the shared drive, but basically the Excel spreadsheet is our kind of drives everything, almost like the air traffic controller for us. And we have a lot of information in there. And we also too have to provide, we have a grant, so we also have to use the data to do our performance reports for the federal grant. So we're kind of in the early stages, not necessarily infant stages, but you know, it's evolving as we go on.
Right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. And I can tell you a little bit more about my background. So before joining the Quattrone Center, I worked as a staff attorney at Innocence Project New Orleans. And there, I mean, it was primarily Excel. And I think just as I was leaving, they were starting to get more into using their data to do kind of a bad apples project, looking through their data to find names that kept coming up in terms of on the law enforcement side or in the prosecutor side, in terms of like the causes of wrongful conviction of names that kept coming up or issues that kept coming up in their wrongful conviction cases. And so that's kind of, where my background was, and it was tons of paper, and they were just sort of starting to move into getting their arms around it. I guess in terms of going further, I mean, for folks that have been in existence for some time, where would you like to go? Or if you pie in the sky, I mean, what do you envision? Where would you like to go from here in terms of your data management and collection? I guess, Jen, since you've seems that your organization's been around for a while.
Yeah, I think where we'd like to go is we are really interested in addition to improving the efficiencies of our, screening processes, using a tool that would be helpful in decision-making at the screening stage. The other thing that we are really interested in doing is having data that we can use to do some data analysis in terms of, like asking a research question and then using the data that we have available to be able to answer those research questions. And so in addition to just sort of collecting in a more systematic way, specific, case information that our system probably has the ability to do, it just hasn't been done in the past. So in addition to doing that, so that we can easily pull reports or statistics on certain things that would be useful for grants, but just, for curiosity's sake, so that becomes easier for us. We do have, these sort of aspirational goals of actually having data that we can use to conduct more sophisticated analyses and hopefully maybe get some insights into wrongful conviction cases that would be something that would be publishable and something that would be useful to other organizations.
Thanks. Anyone else like to share sort of where you'd like to go?
Sure, I would. I think as a lot of people do, struggle in the intake and selection process, and we have a really big backlog that we are trying to work through. And if there is any way, because we do have access, right, to the rest of our files, that there's a way that this data can be used to help us prioritize our cases and prioritize our review and make sure that there isn't a case sitting in there that should rise on our list that isn't, that would alleviate a lot of my anxiety. about having such a backlog. So if there's a way that that can be used for our processes, that's what interests me.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the things that Marissa and I are working on is trying to develop a tool. We call it triage, right? So it's like that you can run your cases through and it can say, these are the ones that, you know, are the ones you should prioritize, I guess, you know, based on everything else in your files. These are the things that indicate that they might be the best bet, you know, in terms of priority. And what kind of backlog do you have?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot.
Yeah. Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo, this is Patrick, I'd echo, you know, a lot of regarding like intake screening. I think for us, with anticipation of so many applications and in so many cases, also use a good tool to be able to basically like fuzzy match. So that way, if we find like duplicate applicants or those that are trying to just see what sticks to the wall, to hopefully be more efficient, reduce some of that. And I think for us also statewide, you know, we have 102 counties, only 4 have their own county conviction integrity unit. So for us, if hopefully the data will show us some trends or hotspots throughout the county, if there's specific law enforcement officers or agencies or prosecutors or you know, criminal justice system where you know, is a hotbed for more conviction integrity review or cases that create prosecutorial misconduct, or the case may be. I'm hoping data will kind of shed some light in those areas where they just don't exist because they lack the resources or attention throughout these counties. So that's kind of the broad view of what we hope the data can help us show, where we could be more efficient with our resources and our team. So that's maybe pie in the sky, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that you and Jocelyn, as you're sort of just putting things together, you know, on the front end, it is easier than for somebody who's at an organization that's been in operation. It's kind of like, what's the saying, you know, building the plane as it's flying. And so you have to sort of, and then you have to then go back, you know, through all your other data and kind of put that into the system. And I can imagine that would, that kind of undertaking would take time and effort and energy that if you're already buried in cases, you know, it won't get prioritized, right?
Yeah, we're trying to head off that, just because we know the manpower it takes, as you guys all know, especially with the how some of these cases are as old as they are, you know, with a lot of the paper documents. It's hard to pull metadata after scanning, so a lot of it's still manual review and input. So I want to save as much manpower to do that, you know, down the road if we start without having a good database system in place. But you know, we don't want to wait forever either, so we're kind of on a balancing act of when to launch and with what resources. So
anyone else want to share sort of where you'd like to go or get to? I know, Jocelyn, it's early days, but since you're still in the maybe dreaming stage, what do you envision?
Ultimately, I would love to have a database that I can pull information from, not only for fulfilling my grant requirements with the unit, but also for perhaps a teaching tool, which is something that I think will be necessary at some point in the future. And by teaching tool, I mean just being able to address problems that I see coming up recurrent in the applications, and maybe if we better train and educate the staff that is either in the police departments, the crime labs, or even the prosecutor's office, you know, we won't have these problems happening again in the future. That's my lofty goal.
Yeah, I mean, how big is your office? Is it?
We have about at least 150 criminal lawyers in the office, in the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. My unit it's me, an investigator, and two admin staff.
Mhm. Yeah. And how about Patrick in your unit or
Well, actually, it's pretty much just me at the moment.
Mhm.
We're search staffing up, so we're going to build out a team of AAGs or attorneys and specific investigators. And we partnered with the Illinois State Police and their crime lab to handle all of our DNA requests and testing, and they've been fully supportive and on board with our unit and sending out statewide. And then I hope to build out, knock on wood. I'd like to get a data analyst and also a forensic specialist to help guide us through some of that, or if needed for like testimony and so forth. But knock on wood, depends on more budgeting. So we'll see.
Yeah. And Marissa, how about you in terms of goals and where you'd like to get eventually?
So eventually, I'd really like this to be part of, what we can use in intake, and then also tracking cases more broadly. Our office does a lot already as far as, like a Brady review and things like that. I think we have a lot of potential resources available to us to beef up our review. We have a good case management system. And as far as our prosecution side is very digital, and our tech guys are great. And so I think we have the opportunity to really incorporate that into what we're doing in CIU. So ultimately like to see those things kind of integrated to improve going forward, not just in our backwards facing review, but also frontwards facing for us.
I guess, what are the things you most need going forward? Is staffing?
Yes, the staffing would be great. Right now, as you know, it's only myself, one other ASA, and then we have a paralegal and an investigator, and just a lot going on here in Orlando. So
Always.
yeah, always, it never comes down over here. So yes, we'd need staffing, and maybe someone who is focused on managing our digital data. We really struggle with that. And so it would be really great to have someone who could really assist us in that, because none of us really have the expertise. We're just sort of trying to cobble it together as we go.
Kathleen, are you able to share a bit about what your office's goals are, and I guess what you'd like to have to get there?
Well, I think down the road, as there's a push on transparency to the public, some type of a dashboard, so you can, similar to the example that was demonstrated to us, and you can just drill down and look at maybe disparities in sentencings and other issues, based on what choices you make, selections, and have that available to the public, because we do that for other, not CRU, but other units, provide a dashboard to the public. And with staffing, the way we handle our intakes, we have law students that do the legal workups, go out and get all of the opinions, as much information as possible. Then I assign it to a screening team, and those are 4 retired attorneys, 2 are retired public defenders or private attorneys, and the other retired prosecutor's office attorney. And so they do the initial screening. We ask the law students, when they get the opinions, look for certain red flags that we've trained them on. And we use a basic system of like a 1, 2, 3. 1 would be, let's get it to the front of the list. 2, there's something there, but it can wait. We take things consecutive as they come in. We're up to 665 intakes. We're up to about 400 with our screeners that have looked and had eyes on these cases. Once the screeners look at it, they either designate it as a closing, and the director reviews it before it's finalized, and it goes to the Attorney General. But then some get moved into reinvestigation, and we have about 25 cases in the reinvestigation mode or whatever. And, you know, the investigators would get more active in that part, going out and talking to witnesses. We like to talk to the applicant because either they didn't provide enough information in their application or we need to clarify it further. So we try to interview the applicants. Yeah, it's we've had one exoneration. I mean, we have two that we're very active on now, but we've had one exoneration in 2021 on a double homicide in Camden.
Lauren, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here and I'm finding the right buttons. I think one of the things we're looking forward to is moving the case forward. Several that I think might have some lessons for us to learn, address possibly the innocence of that person, and we're looking forward to being able to do that. We also are be very glad when we can start pulling the data that we're gathering together. Like we're trying to gather as much, and we're constantly saying, okay, we need to add this, we could probably take out that. So we don't have really definite data tabs yet because we're adding mostly in every.
Nope, we lost her. Maybe she'll come back later. All right. Oh. I'll let her get back. She might have some internet problems. I mean, one of the things that, you know, Marissa said that data can be used for that a lot of people might not consider is, I think, Jen, you mentioned grant reporting, grant writing, and that, you know, being able to track, you know, how long it takes a case to move from initial letter, you know, initial application through to investigation to completion. Being able to accurately track that, you know, can really help you kind of extrapolate and say, like, this is what our needs are. If we had more money, if we had more staff, we'd be able to move these cases faster, and it takes, like, you know, X long to do one case, right? Is that what you sort of had in mind, or?
Yeah, absolutely. That, and you know, I think it can be helpful as well if you know, we cover DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and maybe other folks aren't in this position where you have multiple jurisdictions like that. But you know, it can be, I think, really great if you have a lot of cases concentrated from a certain area. Like we get a lot from Baltimore City. You know, being able to have the statistics on those particular cases to support a grant. We actually were awarded a grant to do some research in that area. So yeah, not only for grant purposes in terms of applying for grants, but also, of course, the grant reporting that has to be done. But I think, you know, having that data to back up grant applications would be really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, I guess they're sending us back. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this. I mean, I hope it was helpful, at least gives us a sense of, you know, what the needs are. And when we get back to the main chat, I'll put my email in the chat. And so, like, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot me or Marissa an email. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Nice meeting with everybody.
Let's see. So Andrew, you should be in here too, right?
Yep, you got it.
Awesome. So hi, everybody. But what we really wanted to do initially is kind of get a sense of where everybody is at, where your offices are. So we're going to, you know, do a full around the horn here and ask everybody to introduce yourself, what office you're with. And Andrew, how about that first question? What system do you currently use for tracking your case information and data? Sound good?
Works for me.
Okay, so I don't have to go, but I'm going to go to Kelly, who's in Indiana, and ask you, Kelly, to introduce yourself, your office, what kind of system you're using, and then pick the next person.
Kelly Botter with Marion County. I'm co-director of the Marion County CIU in Indianapolis, and we currently have a super big Excel spreadsheet to how we keep our data. And I think that's it. And I will go, first person I see is Allie Bennett.
Hi, I'm Allie Bennett. I'm the paralegal for the Conviction Integrity Unit at the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, and I will just introduce my team as well. Sarah DeSimone is the director of the Conviction Integrity Unit, and Miyabi Kadawaki is our summer intern. And we also have a very overwhelming Excel spreadsheet.
Thanks, Allie. So yeah, we're in Middlesex County, which is across the river from Boston. And just to note, one of the complicated aspects of our spreadsheet is we have 54 cities and towns in our county. That is complicated to track all of the cities and towns, different incident numbers, case numbers, lab numbers, and that's one thing we'd love to try to address as well, but it is a spreadsheet. I'll tag Lisa Lazari Stracier. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I did not.
No worries. I'm Lisa, and I am the director of the CIU for the Pennsylvania State.
Lisa
General's
tends to freeze a
office.
bit because she joins us from her house in rural Pennsylvania. Lisa, are you back? And then Lisa's with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, with the statewide office, the Conviction Integrity Unit. I can't speak to her data collection, however, but if hopefully
Am I
she'll
back?
unfreeze. Or try again. Okay, so I'm gonna kick it to Val Newman then.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Valerie Newman. I am the director of the Conviction Integrity Unit for Wayne County, Michigan. That's basically primarily the city of Detroit, but lots and lots of other counties as well. We currently have an Excel sheet, but we are we have both an Excel sheet and a database. Our database is not 100% fully functional, but we are getting there. So we are entering some information into the database, but until we get it fully functional, we are still relying on our Excel sheet as a backup, and I will kick it to Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Gowan. I'm in the newly formed Conviction Review Unit in Memphis, Tennessee. We have also an Excel spreadsheet that is growing daily. I guess I'll kick it back to Brad Gessner.
Hi, I'm Brad Gessner. I'm Chief Counsel at Summit County Prosecutor's Office in Akron, Ohio, and I oversee our Conviction Review Unit. Our legal assistant has a Excel spreadsheet with our cases. And I will go to Adele.
Hi, I'm the co-director of an innocence organization at a law school. So it's a small clinical program. However, we have been reviewing cases since, oh gosh, the early 2000s. So I have an Excel spreadsheet with over 3,000 entries. And of course, I wasn't thinking about what data might be useful 20 years from when I started keeping it. So I really only have, names, dates of when the person wrote, and what we eventually ended up doing with the matter, which in most circumstances was basically writing to say we couldn't help them. And of course, names, their indictment numbers, or not even their indictment numbers, their correctional numbers. And I don't even know, what counties they were in. This is a sort of a statewide database. So it would be great to be able to go back and input stuff so that I could learn from all of that information. I don't know what we can pull out from it now. So that would be very interesting to find out. Anyway, that's where we're at. And I need to pick another person. James Moody.
Hi, I'm James Moody. I'm the legal director at the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project in Washington, D.C. We use a case management and data acquisition and analysis system called Clio, and it is pretty robust, less so on the analysis front, more so on the collection and storage front. So that's our system.
And Jimmy didn't play the game, so I will do it for him.
Oh, sorry. I guess next on my screen is Shelley.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Shelley Thibodeau. I'm the director of the Conviction Integrity Unit in Northeast Florida, which is primarily Jacksonville. And in the breakout room are other members of my team, Tom Brady and Amy Sanderson. And we are using a very cumbersome Excel spreadsheet for our data. I didn't play the game either, sorry. LaTanya.
Hello, I am the paralegal for the Conviction Integrity Unit, Fulton County in Atlanta, Georgia. The director, she is actually in another meeting, so I'm on here by myself. But we deal with the Excel form sheet as well, along with different case management forms and letters and all that good stuff. But it's pretty much on an Excel form. So. Thank you. Let me see. I can't remember who went and who didn't go. So let me see.
That's okay.
Nancy.
Yep.
Nancy.
Great.
Yes.
Hey, Nancy.
I'm Nancy Ducey. I'm the director of the Conviction Unit for Cook County. That's basically Chicago, Illinois, and the county suburbs. I inherited in 2014 when I came on a database that was made by our MIS department. It's on its second alliteration, and we're actually about to go to our third, which is going to be an application-based database. Very similar to a previous comment, I think James made it. We are very good with the data, but not with the analytics. We are only walking, in my opinion, because I cannot talk to other parts of the office. I cannot pull things from my stuff. Does places we're sort of in a vacuum. We are changing the database for our office to something that speaks with outside partners, but I'm still not getting that data from other places to generate in our system in an analytical way. So we've got good data collection, a somewhat cumbersome but workable database that is kind of bespoke to us, but we need to talk. We need that connection more. So that's we're not really even close to running. We're maybe jogging. So that's where we are.
Thanks, Nancy. Lisa, you're back with us now. You want to try again?
Sure. I don't know how much anyone got, but I am the director of the statewide unit for the PA Attorney General's office. We are using an Excel spreadsheet every day. As most of you are saying, we add another category. Did have some externs that did some tremendous work on formulas so that now we can push buttons rather than doing hand tallies of cases for counties or charges. So we're pretty much in the same spot.
And since she was bopping in late, I'll kick it to Brad Roach.
Good morning or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you are. My name is Brad Roach. I am the director of the Conviction Integrity Unit for Pima County Attorney in Tucson, Arizona. We have a spreadsheet that I am filling in, but doesn't have a whole bunch of data yet. So I'd say we're at the beginning. And I don't think Sarah Gresham has gone yet, has she?
Hi, I'm Sarah Gresham. I'm in the CRU in Broward County, Florida. We also have an Excel spreadsheet. We do have access to the office's like overall system. So like if we wanted to pull every arson case in the county, I could do that. But we don't have like an integration for our system, which we're currently trying to create, but we don't have a great idea of what to tell the IT person to create for us. We're sort of working on that. I think that was last. Anybody else?
So Ziba?
I haven't gone. I'm a little bit different from all of you. I'm at Boston University. I run a lab for computing and data sciences. We worked with Bobby when he was at the Suffolk County DA's office. We're working with the Fairfax County DA's office on projects, and we're just looking to see what the needs are and maybe down the line if we can be of assistance. We do projects with our students for external partners. We've been doing a lot in the justice system space. So I'm just here listening to learn. Thanks.
Great. Well, you're certainly welcome. Beth, if you're there. May have stepped away. Carolyn, I think you're the last on my list here. Oh, I think she disappeared. Okay. So we've gone through it. So Andrew, it sounds like everybody's kind of in the same boat. Like we had thought that there's a lot of Excel use going on here. I think the next question really that for you guys to kind of talk about is, pardon me, like what are the barriers for you of moving forward? Like Adele, you said that you have a sheet, but you know, going back in time might take you a lot of resources to have to do that. You know, would it mean more people for you or a different system? And I guess my question really is to Andrew, for all of those folks who are doing with Excels, is that like bad or is that good news from your perspective as somebody who does with data? So why don't I have Andrew answer that first, and then we'll talk about obstacles of moving forward.
Sure. I think when people ask me questions about tools in general, the only general answer I have, right, is that a good tool is one that you use and works for you. So if your Excel sheet is something you feel comfortable with and it's helping you collect what you need, then that might be all you need. If it is way too cumbersome to keep up with the volume of cases you want to review, and you're finding it impossible to integrate with other data sources in an efficient way or at all, then it might be worth considering what it sounds like some of you are already doing in terms of building out your case management system or a different tool that can do these things for you. But what's interesting to me, I guess what I would love to hear more about is with the spreadsheets that you have, you know, what is the struggle for getting what information you need, or where do you feel like you're limited? And I think that could be a really rich conversation to learn about where to potentially go next.
So feel free to just kind of unmute and jump in for that. Like, are you collecting the data that you think you should be collecting? Should you be collecting more? Or go ahead, please, Jimmy.
Yeah, our big problem that we're facing is something that was mentioned in the introduction portion, which is just bodies on the ground to do it. So, you know, we actually just hired an analyst, which we're really excited about. He's a full-time data analyst for us, and we're struggling to get him the data he needs to do his work. You know, we've got horrible data collection practices, even though we had a good piece of software to do it. And we really almost need to start from scratch from our physical files. So our biggest obstacle is looking at, you know, 2,000 physical files sitting in our office, and where do we find the appropriate army of people to go in and enter all the data. And it's hard to find them, and then hard to also narrow down the tools that'll be successful, because even with something like natural language processing, I'm a little bit skeptical of whether it can get the nuances that we need to really get this data into our system.
And if I can just ask you folks, you can just use the raise hand function. How many of you are dealing with physical files, not digital files? Yeah, it's about what I thought. Yeah, so it looks like pretty much nobody has digitized. Does any, or maybe I should ask the other way, does anybody have digitized files that you're dealing with?
Ours really depends on the year the case occurred. So if we have anything like beyond 2008, it's digital. Anything before that's an actual physical file. And I unfortunately never worked in the office before we had digital stuff. So that is also like a learning curve. Like, where do we find things? You know, everything's sort of in some stored unit somewhere. So, I mean, that's one of the hardest parts. And then I think it's the same with what James was saying. Like, do we scan all these old things in? Like, what do we do?
So we have both in Memphis, digital and physical files, and we also have access to the prosecution file out of storage. And what we've been doing is at our second tier of review, when we get a questionnaire back, I get the prosecution file and I read that and inventory it along with the questionnaire to figure out what the data points are. And that's what we put in our spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet's limited just in the way it's set up. I wish we could have a drop-down list in some of the fields where we could say, these are the issues, there's cross-racial ID, there's juvenile, there's DNA, but as it stands, we have a different row for each one of those data points, and it just gets very large very fast.
I'm not even sure what information would be the most useful to collect. That's just an initial question. People are writing, saying I'm innocent, and that's from all over the state. You assess the cases and decide, oh, that's a sentencing matter. I can't help with that. That guy took a plea. It would be very hard to help with that. Whoops, this guy is there. Sure was a heck of a lot of evidence against him. Well, I'm not going to go there. Is that important, or would it be just helpful now if I knew, for example, from which counties are we getting the most requests for review, and what kinds of cases are people writing about? Obviously, people who are doing the most time are writing the most frequently, but is there anything else? I mean, if people have ideas about what's useful information to collect, so that, if you look back over 20 years, you know who you exonerated and you know who you investigated, but I really don't know much else. If anybody has ideas, I'd be happy to hear about it, off list. I think that would be fascinating. I really often wished I could do something with all this information, but I haven't really the slightest idea what.
Yeah, and Marissa, I would just piggyback off of what Adele just said. We're collecting data for what purpose, and what are we using this data for? I mean, I love the idea of being able to look at all of the files in our office to say this sexual battery had a cross-racial identification, but I don't see how we ever get there. So assuming I can't go back into the history of the state attorney's office files and look for that, what is the usefulness? Like, what am I collecting the data for? What creative ways am I using data other than I'm just checking to see, did Detective Baker come up more than once as a detective with a problem? I mean, if you've got in Brooklyn, a detective that's got a problem, so much easier to then go back and look at all the cases where that detective was ever involved. But just as a CIU going forward, I'm collecting data. Like Adele said, what am I collecting? Like, what's useful? And then how am I creatively using this data versus I'm just gathering data? And maybe this is like so basic.
No, I mean, I feel the same way. I feel exactly the same way. Am I going to look at every cop in every case where somebody writes? I mean, I only have had, a couple handfuls of people who are innocent, so I can learn from those matters. But what can I learn from all the people who wrote, whose cases we didn't investigate, or maybe were guilty? Is there anything I can do with all that information? There are certainly people who wrote who I thought, well, I'm not going to go there. There's nothing to do. And I turned out to be completely wrong about that. Well, I can try to learn from those mistakes, but that's not the same as data collection.
I'm going to let Andrew kind of pop in on some of that, I think, but you're right. Those are really important questions to be asking. And one thing I've certainly learned from Jimmy and Andrew and others is that the data you collect informs the questions you want to answer, informs the data you want to collect, right? Do you want to know about the racial disparity of Brady violations in your jurisdiction? And if you know that, is there something that you can do to prevent that from happening, or to change that trajectory, to make it more different? That so knowing what questions you want to ask really informs what data you're keeping. That's the way I've always kind of heard it, but I want to pop that to Jimmy and Andrew in particular.
Sure. So I feel like I'm hearing. Oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy. Were you about to? I can.
Oh no, yeah. I was just gonna say I can say Shelley and Adele from our perspective at MAPE, the reason we're doing such a huge push towards better collection and then analysis is we just feel there's a tremendous amount we can learn. Both to help our mission of being more efficient and effective with our limited resources and identifying cases that may be exceptionally worthwhile to pursue or to triage to the top of the list, but also with the mission of trying to better understand what causes wrongful convictions in the first place. And, I think there's the difficulty here is that a human can only do so much. And we're looking both to hopefully use more sophisticated analysis techniques to find the correlations and find the relationships between factors that we may not even think of. You know, we can all point to the obvious ones that, you know, obviously coercive confessions are going to be problematic. But, you know, what are the factors that we may not be thinking of that only a more sophisticated analysis can point to that can kind of take us to the next level of prevention? And then, of course, as Andrew, I think, showed, we, you know, are working on creating similar tools to help provide our screening and intake department with, you know, not to automate it, but just to give a data point as to what, you know, scientific analysis may say is a particularly worthwhile case.
Yeah, that is perfect. I'm so happy that you talked before I did. But I think if only to build off that and maybe address your question directly too, it is hard for everybody to find the resources, I think, to get lots of manual data entry done. I wish I could say that I could direct you all to an application for funding right now and that we would work together on that. I hope that maybe someday that'll be the case if we can keep pushing funders together, but I don't know of anything right now. I do think one maybe particularly relevant example, somebody brought up cross-racial sexual assault cases. We could also think of, say, bite mark cases, things where we know that there's higher risk factors and which are relatively simple to interpret. I think that would be an excellent candidate for natural language processing. If you can get a hold of paper documents and scan them, you could probably create a pretty easy trend of how often those sorts of things occurred. And then with that kind of information, the value of it, I think, gives us a sense of where existing exonerations fit into that and how to look forward. So if you look at the data on, say, number of exonerations per year for the last 20 or 30 years, many of you probably know this, but it's almost a straight line up. And I think when it comes to some of these risk factors, there's a big question of, are we clearing a backlog here, or do some of these things continue to go in practice?
Right. And Val, you have your hand up?
It's a real quick, I don't want us to forget about the other reason for collecting data, which is helping all of us get more resources into the unit. So I would say, in response to some of the questions, in particular, Adele, like, what do I do with all these cases I reject? I think you collect very limited data from those cases. You collect much more robust data from cases where you're granting relief or where you've identified a jailhouse informant or some other red flag to innocence issue. I mean, that's at least the way I do it. And then I use the overall data metrics to advocate for more help for the CIU. So it's really good to go to a funder and say, I've received 2,100 requests for review. We've cleared 1,100, and 1,100 backlog with the staffing I have is basically a 20-year backlog of cases for me not to get another case. That's very effective messaging in terms of getting more resources. So I would say that is a big piece of the use of the data. And then the other piece, I got a grant in 2018 to work with Urban Institute, and we did a very, very robust dive into data collection and data points and how much is reasonable to collect. Not everything you want to collect, which is where we started, then used a funnel to what's reasonable to collect and what are the most important data points to create our database and to make it very searchable. And we modeled it after the National Registry. So I think there's, I think there's multiple questions we need to think about in terms of data, questions that we're answering and how we can use it.
Right. So we need to wrap up, unfortunately, here, but I'm so glad Val said that, because that's exactly why we wanted to launch this project, because we recognize that people are at different places in their development in terms of data collection and data analytics. And so the whole point of the project is to be able to give you guidelines, Adele, about what should I be tracking? How should I be tracking it? What kind of answers should I be looking for? What kind of metrics should I be trying to define? And what do I want to achieve by collecting data in a better way? So it's a plug for folks to participate with that over the summer. It'll just be a couple meetings for folks to do. And the other, just I want to add to what Val said about being able to ask for resources. One of the key points of data we suggest people track that isn't really about the cases themselves, but about your management. How long does it take you to get a letter opened and responded to? to get a questionnaire back and get it, to make a decision on it. And when you can show a funder or whoever is giving you resources, how long that it takes you a month to be able to review a questionnaire before you can respond to it, that's an argument for more resources, so that can be quicker, right? So there's even kind of surprising little elements that you can be tracking to be able to help with that. I'm going to kick back to Andrew for him to give any closing points before we rejoin the others.
So the purposes of this space are to, one, go around, introduce each other, talk about some of like the status of where your office is, and maybe just briefly like outline some of the main challenges that you're facing in doing the work. And I did a couple of these convenings when I was working in the DA's office. We called them DA data cons, because what we realized quickly is that so many offices were facing the same challenges. And then when we got together and we talked about it, it was highly therapeutic. And it was a nice chance to commiserate together, to realize that we're not all alone, and that when we act, with a common voice and purpose, it oftentimes causes technical assistance providers and funders to realize, oh, wow, this is a thing that we need to get involved in. And so the hope is here to identify some of those common challenges and areas in different offices and leverage that knowledge and those learnings into trying to get some TA and funding from institutions and grant making organizations to back up some of that work, to help you all to move that work along respectively in the offices where you are. So why don't we just start quickly, go around the room, maybe talk about the organization you work, what your role is, the size of the organization, and where your data and tech situation is. Maybe just take a couple minutes for each person. So my name's Bobby Constantino. I worked at the Suffolk County DA's office. I managed the office's external data and technology portfolio. The office, I think, had about 280 or so staff, handled around 20 to 22,000 cases per year. We had boxes upon boxes of paper files that were very, very rich in data. And we had an electronic database where a small percentage of that data made it into, but it was mostly used for prosecutorial purposes. It wasn't really used prior to that for analytical purposes. But one thing that was amazing was that we had a group of researchers come in and they produced an as-if random assignment paper called Misdemeanor Prosecution that was very, very complex, and it had a huge impact nationally. That was done by Anna Harvey, Amanda Agan, and Jen Doliak. And so that's just to say, like, if your data feels like it's a mess, oftentimes there's a lot you can still do with it without really knowing it. And I'm going to just turn it over now to the person to my left, which is Carrie Sperling.
Hi, Carrie Sperling. I'm the director of the Conviction Review Unit at Minnesota Attorney General's office. We're a small unit. Letty, our paralegal, is on with me, and we have a secretary, and it's been us. And we set up a database before we started taking in applications when I started in 2021 that is housed in SharePoint and is pretty robust for what we're collecting. We're collecting a lot on intake when we get in cases, but also expanding it out into our investigation, so we know whether it's a forensic science question or certain flags we have for the cases. We have, length of time incarcerated, whether they have multiple trials, all the stuff about trials. So we're trying to build a robust database. I think the question for me for conviction review is how to meaningfully use this data in the next day when we look at other cases. Like what can we learn for it when every case seems to be so unique and turn on specific particular witnesses that aren't reliable, or just that the lessons don't seem to transfer all that well.
Carrie, do you want to kick it to someone?
Sure, I think Lisa's next to me.
Sorry, I was having trouble accessing my mute button to unmute myself. I'm Lisa Kavanaugh. I am the director of the Innocence Program at CPCS, which is the Massachusetts Statewide Public Defender's Office. And both of my staff attorneys, Libby and Jill, are here. I have to say, I think Libby will probably be the most useful of us in talking about our data collection process, but we have had, we have received a couple of federal grants that have allowed us to do some data analysis of our kind of the universe of cases that were litigated by my unit since we started in 2010. And so some of our data efforts have focused on an internal re-examination of the things that that we're able to code for and discern about our own practice. But then we've also been at an agency level involved in other data related projects, including a database on police officers, police actors who've been identified as known bad actors, and that's part of a broader project that that was supported by NACTL. And I think I'm mostly just here to learn from others, but also sort of share some of the challenges that we've had around how to streamline and systematize our coding efforts. I think that's been one of our biggest barriers. And actually Libby is next to me on my screen, so let her fill in what I've left out.
Hi, I'm Libby Hugetts. I'm a staff attorney with the CPCS Innocence Program. So in addition to litigating our cases, we, as Lisa said, have a data project. We were in Excel up until last year when I sort of had a meltdown and said Excel does not work. It doesn't do enough for us. So now we are currently housed in Grist. And our biggest issue is me and the user error. I am a lawyer, not a data analyst. And so we've partnered with a data analyst this spring. We are moving forward to work with one because I think that that's really our biggest hurdle at this point is we have the data, but how to analyze it and how to analyze it in a streamlined version. But collecting the data is very labor intensive. And quite frankly, the sort of data we're collecting, as Jill and Lisa have learned, really require an attorney to do. We have about 300 variables, but we're looking at race among all actors, which we can outsource to interns and other staff members, but we're also looking at the sort of specifics of the litigation that happened post-conviction and the direct appeal, but also post-conviction and at the trial level, which really requires some legal knowledge. So we're collecting, what was done in the investigation leading up to trial, what was litigated in motions pre-trial. We're also looking at post-conviction discovery practices and hoping that we can maybe make some efforts there. In Massachusetts, as I guess in most states, it's a bit cumbersome and both sides sort of tend to agree the way the statutes are currently written. And so seeing the data in numbers to show, this is how a Brady violation was discovered, or this is how we discovered, evidence that were in police files that the DA's office didn't have access to. This sort of puts it in a more objective view. But really the data collection is difficult because, as Bobby mentioned, a lot of us are working off of paper files or files that have been scanned, or they're sort of, not all files are complete, especially when you're working on these cases that were from 40, 50 years ago. So data collection has been really troublesome, but I think we've made good headways. The next sort of step is how do we do an analysis in a streamlined way that isn't me going into Google and, hunting and pecking and figuring out how to make a graph and look at it. So I'll introduce Jill Tessier. She's to my right.
Hi, I'm Jill Tessier. I'm the other staff attorney with the CPCS Innocence Program. I don't have much to offer here because Libby has done pretty much all of the work on our data project, other than what she mentioned, sort of like
in a handful of cases trying to find all of the variables, which like took hours. Even on cases that I was directly involved in, it took me a really long time to sort of find the information to be able to enter what we needed for each variable. So I'm sort of here to learn and see what other people are doing and see how I can hopefully help Libby at some point. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to tag someone. I'm gonna go to Ian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Saucy. I work for Boston University here in a program called Spark. I've actually worked with Bobby when he was at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. We partner with different external organizations to work on like data science, software engineering projects, and which is how we've worked with Bobby before. So I'm mostly here just kind of collect information, learn to help us inform future projects and collaborations we're on. And I will pop it to Letty.
Hello, everyone. My name is Letty Usweta. I'm the paralegal for the Conviction Review Unit here at the Minnesota Attorney General's Office. I work directly with Carrie Sperling. Carrie pretty much covered most of it. Just to add to it, that as she had mentioned, the majority of our database is housed in SharePoint. We have various different sites where we collect different information at different points in the process. The first difficulty that we encountered since I started in February 2022 was finding a way essentially to better house all of the data in one location instead of having it in various different locations, because that does require a lot of labor intensity on my end of making sure that all of the sites are communicating and have the same data on each page. In response to that, I worked with our app developer here at the office to develop a Power App to essentially collect information at the various different points in the process in one location, store it into OneDrive, and then we're able to then filter for specific information to then display on pages that way. That's still a work in progress. It is developed. We're in the process now of utilizing that app, but the newest difficulty that I've now encountered is now we're going to have to backdate and go back to those applications and refill in that information in one location that we've been putting in different locations up to this point. So that's probably the issue that we encounter, and we're working out the best way to kind of streamline that process to get all of that data into that app to be able to utilize it in the future. We received about over 1,000 applications since we started collecting public applications, so it is going to be quite a big job. I will popcorn Michael. He's right below me here.
You hear me? Can you hear me? My name is Michael Tolley, and I'm kind of a odd man out of this, odd person out of this. I'm not part of any of these organizations. I'm a psychology professor at Cornell University, and I'm an expert in human memory, and I study some forensic issues. And about 7 years ago, I got involved and interested in wrongful convictions and exonerations. And we've been doing research in my lab and my colleagues' archival, scanning through the Innocence Project and NRE databases, looking for factors that are responsible for wrongful convictions, looking at constellations of factors. One of the things that's interesting is we talk about pure versus impure cases. A pure case means there was only one cause. That doesn't happen that often, maybe 10, 15% of the time. Most of these cases involve multiple causes and factors, the key canonical factors in the NRA and so on. And so we're looking more at impure cases now because that's where really the action is. And we adopted a strategy that we call looking back to move forward, which is the idea of going through our archival data to identify some of these situations and factors and reasons why you get wrongful convictions and so on, many which you know, of course. And then that moves us forward to doing experiments in the lab to the extent that we can do them. Things like official misconduct, we can't really do experiments on that kind of thing. Doesn't make sense. But we do a lot of things involving misidentification, for example, and so on. And then it's a two-way street because experiments sometimes, oh, gee, we need to go back and take a look at another archival search, that kind of thing. And we are hoping that some of the things that we're doing can inform to the extent you guys are really at a different level than we are in terms of what you're doing in your offices and so on. But we're hoping that some of the work that we're doing will identify the fact that we're dealing with these constellations of factors, that official misconduct almost never occurs by itself, which is really interesting in and of itself, I believe. That's a real problem, obviously. And we're trying to say that too often criminal justice reforms are based on sort of single cause thinking. We need to expand that to think about other ways to have reforms that take into account that most cases are not that at all. And I do have a contact with the CIU. Her name is Shelley Thibodeau. She's the director in Jacksonville. When I was at the University of North Florida, she and I connected, and she's actually been on some of my publications. And I'm here to learn from you, basically. Hope that maybe I have something to offer. Thank you. How do I tag somebody else? How do I tag somebody else?
Pick a name, someone who hasn't gone there.
How about Carolyn, Paul? Do I?
Oh, yeah, I got it. I'm not sure if Tiffany and Izzy have already gone. I was in the walking group. I went to the wrong group, but I'm with the Georgia Innocence Project office. So if have y'all already introduced yourselves? Okay, well then I'm gonna introduce us. We use Clio and Airtable, I believe, and if y'all would like to add anything else.
Great job, Carolyn. So, and also I want to apologize that it's dark. It just started torrential downpour where I am, so it is very dark very suddenly. But my name is Tiffany Bush. I am the pro bono coordinating attorney with the Georgia Innocence Project. Carolyn is actually the intern that I'm working with this summer. And so like she said, we primarily use Clio. We also, in terms of just, I guess, file management and storage, just use Google Suite for everything. And we have an attorney on staff who her title is Accountability Counsel. And her work is geared towards sort of creating a database for bad actors and sort of tracking that information across cases. And that is what we have created in Airtable that Carolyn alluded to. I kind of feel like I should mention that both Izzy and I thought that we should be in the walking group, but we were unilaterally placed in the running group. So you all are doing some fantastic things that we have already been writing down and gotten ideas from. In terms of data collection and management, we've done several piecemeal things over the years. One big thing that I am doing in my work, and I guess I should have described my work a little bit more, in that I oversee our case screening project. So I train and provide ongoing support to legal volunteers and other pro bono volunteers who assist with the screening of our cases. And so one of the projects that we have right now, we are partnering with a firm that has been sort of a forerunner in using relativity. And so we have been exploring ways in which we can incorporate relativity use to collect data and better investigate, streamline the investigation of our cases and our case evaluation processes in general. Through the work that needs to be done on that case file. And so that's sort of still in progress right now. And I will pass it over to Izzy, who is our case coordinator, who can speak more to all of our data collection and usage efforts.
Yeah, so I think Tiffany got most of it. We're using relativity in a couple different ways. One, in this really big screening case. In one project, it's looking at cases that we had closed. In one project, it's looking at known exonerations in a particular county. And we briefly were experimenting. I am now going to space on what the name of the program was, something that was vaguely connected with relativity, but used a little bit more artificial intelligence. NextLP. And was supposed to help do things like read the tone of emails, which was cool, but then didn't really end up being particularly useful for what we were trying to use it for, and or we could never really figure it out. It could have been either of those things. And I think ultimately all of the individual pieces of what we're doing are all very cool and exciting and useful, and none of them communicate with each other, and they're all very separate and they're not housed anywhere. So it's, okay, we have this incredible bad actor tracker that's on a totally different program than how we're tracking anything else. We have, I think, at least 3 different platforms that we're using relativity on. So there's a lot of potential there, but it's not cohesive in any type of way. And I think that's part of the Tiffany and I were not sure if we were walkers or runner type problems. And yeah. And I'm sorry, I will pass it. Do you pronounce it Tara or Tara?
It's Tara.
Tara.
Thanks, Izzy.
I'll pass it to Tara.
Thanks. I'm also here because Marissa put me in this group, and I would say that my organization, which is the Exoneration Project, which does post-conviction work in the Innocence Network, we're probably somewhere between, I would say, walking and running. I mean, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are frankly really similar to what Tiffany and Izzy and Carolyn just talked about in terms of tracking different things in different systems, sort of starting a database for a particular purpose, and then it's having it be, in a specific format. And so I think that we're doing better than Excel because we are using Clio, we use Airtable, we've used Relativity for certain projects. But we're really at a point where I think we want to think about how to have something more global or have some things that will be more robust as we get more cases. We've been working on some, in particular, some mass exoneration work where we're looking at, lots of different people who have maybe the same officers involved in something or similar issues. And I think we want to think about, in particular, how we can better track data for those kinds of projects. So that's where we are. I think that might be everyone because Ayub just left. But if there's someone who hasn't gone that I'm not thinking of, I'm sorry that I'm missing you.
I think there's one more person that the screen name says iHomes. And they just said, I'm Ida Holmes with Shelby County DA, Attorney General. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Bobby, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. That's really helpful. It sounds like what I'm hearing, and it's interesting that this group, I think, has more IOs than any other group compared to the others. So we got a few minutes, Marissa just said. What I'm hearing the most is that the challenges are in data that's siloed and separate, agencies not sharing it, and especially they're probably not sharing it with agencies or entities outside of the criminal legal system space. Which puts you in a position where you need to collect your own version of the data rather than getting it directly like from an API electronically. And so the challenges are in analyzing that data and not knowing if what you have is comprehensive or complete, and also in like identifying trends and identifying actors or like problem spaces or problem issues in a way that's comprehensive or efficient is a challenge here. One thing I do just want to note for the CPCS folks and Libby is that Ian at BU Spark like they were like 3/4 of the way finished with an app that would scan criminal complaints, applications for complaints, police reports, booking sheets, Miranda waivers, and queries in Massachusetts. Now, normally when you get your packet, your case packet, like in district court or in Superior Court, it's usually those same structured documents are the same documents as the prosecution has in their file at the outset. Obviously, as the case grows, there's more and more stuff entered into there. But what was interesting about the anecdote that I gave during the intro was that the police report that was being entered into the DA's database usually just had the name of the reporting officer listed on the police report. But as you all know, that booking photo has got like 10 officers, and often a supplemental one, right, will have the name of the detectives and the other officers that are doing the work on that case. And this app that they created could scan all of that data into a database. So just like y'all, I think that DA's offices, and this is also relevant, by the way, to every other org that's trying to take, and including CIUs, if you're trying to take the data that's in these structured law enforcement documents and put it into a database, you can cut out the human element by using technology. Point being that Ian and their team was like nearly complete with the records in Boston when the project unfortunately got discontinued. But my point is that y'all should talk.
Yeah, I was actually going to message Ian. If you could send me your email address, I would love to connect.
Sure, I'll do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So like, go ahead.
I was going to say that that app sounds great. And it's actually something we've been talking about a lot. It was something that is, I think the community, especially the innocence community, in talking about data, is talking about using AI and scanning technologies. I think some of the difficulty lies in some of these older cases where we're representing people on cases from 1978. Like there's no paper, there's no electronic file of that unless we go in and scan it. And, as you know, that those papers from 1978 are rice paper, like paper thin. And so, but yeah, I think moving forward, it is good to know that there's technology like that out there. And theoretically moving forward, our cases will be newer versus, with better technologies than they are from, 50 years ago, 40 years ago.
Quick question, and this includes CIUs and IOs. Does your unit respectively, or your team respectively, have access to your larger organization's database?
That's a really complicated question. I mean, the short answer is because we're part of Private Counsel Division, which is like a separate part of the Public Defender's Office from staff defenders. We have to be treated as a separate law firm in order to be able to do what we do, in order to not have to run a conflict check anytime we do a case. And so what that means as a practical matter is that we're siloed out intentionally so that we can do our work. But I feel like the other problem is that CPCS is just starting to think about how do we collect data, because as a statewide public defender's office, that is one entity that's in a very good position to collect certain basic information like officer names. And all of that is currently being done manually when cases are opened. Someone is doing the data entry. So, if there were a way with every new case that got opened or every new case that came through our office for that material to be scanned and run through a program.
As we're getting folks back here, and actually I'm going to kind of use moderator's priority here. Make sure that we have everybody back. Is Bobby's room back? No, don't see them. Yep, here they come. Okay. So as we said at the top of this meeting, one of the reasons we wanted to do this way, and the particular reasons why I asked Andrew and Bobby in particular to be here to help out, is because we want to be able to help folks answer the question, what kind of data should I be tracking? How do I track it? How can I analyze it? How do we move forward? And so over the summer, we'll be having 2 data summit meetings with anybody who wants to participate in those, to try to help us produce guidelines for people to be able to answer those questions. So I'm actually putting in the chat a link to a very, very brief form for folks who are interested in participating in those discussions. It's just, will be probably a 2-hour meeting twice over the summer. We'll be asking you to participate in these discussions, help us produce some guidelines. We'll give you the guidelines back for you to review it and to sign off on, and then we'll be producing it out in hopefully by the fall or early winter for folks to be able to have. So we very much need folks to participate in that project to be able to help it evolve so that we can be helpful for folks. And just in our last 10 minutes or so together, I just wanted to give each group a chance to kind of report back on things that you found helpful from the other participants in your group, things that you are hoping to get out of a project like this. And I'm looking for Kia from the crawling group. Are you back? There you are. Hi, Kia.
Hi. Yeah, we had a nice chat. Our group was a couple of people who their organizations were new, brand new. One was just 6 weeks old. The other was, still, so they were kind of just getting their processes together, figuring out which data management tools made sense for them, and just getting their systems together. And there were a few that were with organizations that were, had been in operation for several years, that were trying to figure out how to, just improve, their current systems and make them work for them better in terms of applying for grants, and then also they hope to use their data to be able to better track their cases and, look for trends, look for ways that they can use their own cases to operate better and identify other cases. And then, so yeah, I think we had a good mix. I mean, in terms of what they needed in order to improve was staffing. I mean, that was sort of, agreed upon by everybody. And I think it was really just an opportunity to hear about where other people were and, the kind of things, the kind of opportunities or things that data could be used for.
Thanks, Kia. Andrew, you want to be our reporter from our group?
Sure. So we were in the walking group by and large, most people using spreadsheets, but a couple folks with case management systems. I think a split with a couple different kinds of questions, ranging from what things should we be tracking, how do we prioritize the things we want to track, what are we ultimately going to do with this data as we start to track things. And we started to have a little bit of discussion about that, but I think a real hope to get this in the future, to come up with some more robust guidelines as we move forward with meetings. So really want to lift up, I think it was from Val, certainly one of the best things you can get from tracking is advocating for more funding and resources. So that was a great point.
Yep, absolutely. And Bobby, your turn.
Awesome. So the participants in our group, actually, I think all had some sort of electronic database up and running where they're tracking. The challenges that they were encountering were that data sources are so siloed, and that it's really hard even to get good comprehensive data sets from even the agencies that they're within sometimes, because of conflict reasons and other things. And then it's even harder to get good data sets from external agencies. And then the other sort of big thing that was reported out was that it was very challenging to like keep the data updated, because so much of that work is still manual. It's like, yes, we're now running in one way, but in this other way, which is we have to keep this database updated, we're still doing it all manually. And it was really cool because there was a participant who has been working for a lab that's been working on, in Massachusetts, one of our participants was from Massachusetts, working on creating an OCR tool that can scan structured documents, the very same structured documents that the team is working with in Massachusetts. So that was a nice bit of serendipity that maybe will lead somewhere to cut out the human task of having to enter it all manually. But anyways, a lot of the challenges were common and were shared. And so I'm looking forward to, seeing how to troubleshoot and to sort of collaborate with the different entities in future meetings.
Great. And then, so we have just a couple minutes kind of left here. So I just wanted to see if folks had other things they wanted to add from their groups in particular, from where they were here. What we were hoping for today was to kind of hear from you about where you're at, what your obstacles are. We kind of anticipated this would be somewhat of a therapy session. So if that's what you got out of it, that's fine too. But really about informing where we're given everybody's limited resources and funding where we are, can we come up with tools to be able to help you do your jobs better, to help you identify cases quicker, to help get cases into the pipeline quicker, and to give you the information that you want to be able to try to prevent errors from happening or act on them quicker when they go. So I'm kind of looking around to see if folks had anything they wanted to add to that. Yeah, Lisa.
Hopefully I won't disconnect. I think unless I'm missing something, it seems like I understand and I agree my unit feels the same way about the resources necessary to collect, input, analyze, formulate, identify the cases. But, and you've heard me say this before, Marissa, the idea behind, the mission behind us, what we're doing is to put ourselves out of business. So some of the data collection, no one talked about it, is so that we can stand on credibility. I mean, when we walk into a local DA's office and say, look at this review, something needs looked at, we can, and they're going to say, well, why do you say that? Well, look at the information that we have collected. And this is pointing to something doesn't smell right here, the sniff test. So that component of data analysis, I think, lends itself not just to the funding part, but the idea of our credibility as a whole.
Well put. Well put. Any other thoughts folks wanted to express? Adele's given a thumbs up over there, which is
Can I
great.
ask a question?
Please.
As I listen to this, I'm a data person. I'm a university professor, as I explained in my group. Once all these projects are done and you've collected this data, what are you going to do with this? Is it going to go to a journal, a magazine, a professional publication? Does the center collect this and put this out? I'd love to try to send some of my research your way. Where's it go?
So if I understand the question correctly, it's what's the goal of the project, of the Data Summits project? It's to be able to produce a document, a resource for people who do this work. And like all the other resources we have produced from the Quattrone Center, they're publicly available on our website, on the convictionreview.net website. And of course, we push it out as well to other organizations that are doing this kind of work all around the country. So it's not about publication. It's not about that kind of, that's not the goal per se. It's to have a tool that is useful that we can get into people's hands right away.
Thank you.
Right. So I'm going to just kind of looking back to Bobby and Andrew, seeing if you guys had anything additional you wanted to add. And then I just had a couple closing comments.
Take it away.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for being here. The link to participate in the Data Summits is in the chat. It is less than 2 minutes to fill it out. Please, if you're interested in participating in this project, please do so. As always, remind folks that these webinars are made possible by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Administration that was given to the Quattrone Center as a TTA provider for grantees under the Upholding the Rule of Law and Wrongful Conviction Prevention programs. And next month, we are going back to kind of more substantive discussions in terms of things that can help you with your reviews by having experts on fingerprinting who will be presenting with us on how are fingerprints taken, what are they done, giving background information, and talking about some of the reliability issues and other things that may be helpful for you in your reviews and as you're doing your case analyses. So as always, we thank you. I am launching a very quick poll, which we need to do for data keeping for BJA purposes. I've just asked that you complete that poll. And thank you, Kia, for putting our email addresses in the chat for folks if you need to get in touch with us for anything following up. Thank you so much to Bobby and to Andrew both for giving us your expertise and your time. We're very, very grateful. and look forward to working with everybody over the summer. Thank you.